Imagine being a 62-year-old widow who just found out her late husband was a secret millionaire, leaving her $48 million. That same evening, your only son shows up with papers demanding you sign it all over. You refuse. And then, in the middle of the night, he locks you in your own house. But he has no idea that you are not a helpless widow, that you have a plan, and that a place is waiting for you that he knows absolutely nothing about. The day the world tilted on its axis started with the smell of my husband's favorite coffee, a dark roast that always seemed to fill the kitchen with his presence, even though he'd been gone for 3 weeks. I was in the middle of meticulously polishing the silver, a habit I'd picked up after our retirement, a small, futile attempt to bring order to the chaos that grief had created. The sunlight streamed through the bay window, catching the dust motes dancing in the air like tiny lost souls. It was a peaceful moment, a rare one. I hummed an old Fleetwood Mac song, trying to believe that life could one day feel normal again. My name was Dorothy May, and at 62, I thought I'd seen it all. I'd raised a son, buried a husband, and navigated the murky waters of suburban gossip with the grace of a seasoned diplomat. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for the call that came at 10:47 a.m. It was Mr. Alastair Finch, my late husband's attorney. His voice, usually a smooth baritone, was clipped and formal. "Mrs. May, I need to see you immediately. There are some details regarding your husband's will." My heart, already a fragile thing, felt like it was doing a slow, clumsy pirouette. "Details? Alastair, is something wrong?" I asked, my hand instinctively tightening around a silver creamer. "I cannot discuss this over the phone, Dorothy. Please, come to my office." The line went dead. Alastair Finch didn't do dramatics. If he was calling me in like this, it wasn't about a forgotten tax form. I left the silver half-polished, grabbed my purse, and drove to his downtown office, my mind racing with every terrible possibility. Had Robert secretly taken out a huge loan? Was there a lien on the house? Had he gambled away our savings in some clandestine poker game with his old golf buddies? I walked into his opulent office, all dark wood, leather, and shelves lined with leather-bound law books. The air was thick with the scent of money and old paper. Alastair was waiting for me, his expression grave. He motioned for me to sit and slid a thick manila folder across the desk. The sheer weight of it was unnerving. "Dorothy, Robert, he had a penchant for privacy. He was a very successful man, as you know." "Yes, but we were comfortable. We had a nice home, a healthy retirement fund. What's this about?" I asked, a knot forming in my stomach. Alastair opened the folder, revealing a series of documents. On top, in bold black letters, was a number that made my breath catch in my throat. $48 million? Robert built a very successful and entirely private real estate portfolio over the last 2 decades. He created a trust, and as of his passing, all assets were liquidated and placed into this account. You are the sole beneficiary, Dorothy. It was a surprise to me as well. He wanted to make sure you were taken care of no matter what. I felt my head swim. $48 million? It sounded like a number from a movie, a fantastical sum that belonged to Hollywood stars and Silicon Valley billionaires, not to a woman who still clipped coupons from the Sunday paper. For a moment, I was speechless. Then, a slow, disbelieving laughter bubbled up, a mix of hysteria and pure, unadulterated shock. "Are you telling me my husband was a secret millionaire?" Alastair gave a small, solemn nod. He was. He wanted to surprise you, to give you a legacy of total financial freedom. He wrote a letter for you, too. He handed me a sealed envelope. Inside, Robert's familiar, elegant handwriting filled the page. "My dearest Dot, if you're reading this, I've gone ahead of you. I know this must be a shock, but I never wanted you to worry. I wanted you to live out your golden years without a single care. I did this for you. All of it. I love you more than words can say. Now go buy that silly sports car you always wanted, or a jet, whatever you want. You deserve it. I was a mess of emotions, grief, shock, and a kind of bewildered, almost offensive gratitude. Robert had been this whole other person, a man with a secret financial empire, all for me. What the hell was I supposed to do with a fortune I never knew existed? I spent the next 2 days in a daze, trying to process all of it. I didn't tell a soul, not my bridge club ladies, not my lifelong friend Carol, and certainly not my son David. David was a good man, but he always had a certain entitlement, a sense that whatever his father and I had would eventually be his. I didn't want to complicate his grief with this bizarre, life-altering news. I decided to keep it to myself, at least until I figured out what was what. It was my secret to savor. The evening of the third day, David called. "Mom, I'm coming over. We need to talk about Dad's estate." I froze. He knew? How could he possibly know? I hadn't said a word. But David had a way of sniffing out an opportunity. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. When he arrived, he didn't HUD me. He just stood in the entryway, looking around the living room as if appraising the furniture. His wife, Brenda, was right behind him, her eyes sharp and assessing. She was a woman who saw dollar signs in everything from a chipped teacup to a diamond necklace. "Mom," David said, his voice a little too smooth, "we've been talking. Dad had a few assets, and it's time to start the probate process." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "David, there's nothing to worry about. Your father and I had a joint account. Everything is fine." His smile was thin. "Don't be modest, Mom. I spoke with Dad's assistant. She mentioned a lawyer, Mr. Finch, who handled some special accounts." He said special, as if it were a code word for secret money. My stomach dropped. I should have known Robert's inner circle would talk. My jaw tightened. There was no escaping this. "David, sit down," I said, gesturing toward the sofa. "Your father's lawyer, Mr. Finch, handled his will. He explained everything." I decided to start small, to gauge his reaction. "He left a very generous inheritance." David leaned forward, a glint in his eye. "How generous? We've been meaning to upgrade the house, and Brenda really wants a new car. We could use a little help." His blatant disregard for my grief, his immediate jump to personal gain was a slap in the face. My husband had just died. My son was talking about new cars and home renovations. The man's sheer audacity made me want to pour my cup of tea right over his smug, entitled head. But I was still in shock, still navigating the waves of a new reality. I took another deep breath, the taste of betrayal bitter on my tongue. "David, your father, he was more successful than we knew." I hesitated, my hand trembling slightly. "He left me everything. All of it." The silence that followed was deafening. David's mouth was agape. Brenda's face went from an impatient smirk to a mask of pure avaricious rage. She looked at me not as her mother-in-law, but as a roadblock. $48 million? David finally stammered, his voice cracking. But that's our inheritance. That's what we've been waiting for our whole lives." His words were like a dagger. Not ours, as in his, mine, and Robert's. Ours, as in his and Brenda's. I couldn't believe his audacity. My sweet Robert had spent years building this for me, for my comfort, and here was my son, a grown man, acting like a petulant child who just had his favorite toy taken away. "David, your father, he left this to me, for my security. It's not for you to demand," I said, my voice rising with a strength I hadn't known I had.
This is my inheritance. Brenda stepped forward, her face a thundercloud. What kind of mother are you, Dorothy? Are you honestly going to sit on all that money and not give a single dime to your own son? Their sense of entitlement was a poison. It was a poison that my late husband must have seen coming, and a chill went down my spine as I finally understood the truth in his letter. He hadn't just given me the money, he'd given me a shield. "I'm not giving you a dime," I said, the words coming out sharper than I intended. The shock on their faces was a small, satisfying victory, but it was nothing compared to the fury that erupted in my son's eyes. He stood up, his face a contorted mask of rage. "You can't do this, Mom. This is an insult to Dad's memory. We'll see about this." He slammed his hand on the table, making the teacups rattle. "You're a cold, selfish old woman." I felt a surge of indignation. I had raised this boy, sacrificed so much for him, and now in my darkest hour, he was calling me selfish because I wouldn't hand over money that was never, ever his to begin with. "Get out," I said, my voice trembling. "Get out of my house, both of you." I expected an argument. I expected a fight. What I didn't expect was for him to turn around, walk to the front door, and unlock it. He didn't open it. He simply locked it, walked back, and pulled out his phone. "We're not going anywhere, Mom. Not until you sign it over." The look in his eyes wasn't just anger. It was something colder, more calculating. It was the look of a stranger. To continue this story and see what happens next, don't miss the next part. You won't want to miss how this unfolds.
He locked the door, and the click of the latch echoed in the sudden, terrible silence of my home. It was a sound that seemed to seal my fate, a metallic final note in the symphony of betrayal. My son, the boy I had raised with love and infinite patience, was now standing in my living room, holding me hostage for money he had no right to. I felt a cold dread seep into my bones, a kind of bone-deep horror I hadn't felt since I stood at Robert's graveside. "David," I said, my voice barely a whisper, a strange mix of disbelief and an icy calm. "What do you think you're doing? You can't hold your own mother captive." Brenda scoffed, crossing her arms over her chest. "Oh, please, Dorothy, don't be so dramatic. This is for your own good. You're an old woman. What are you going to do with $48 million? You'll just get swindled. We're doing you a favor, really. We'll set up a trust, give you a generous allowance, and you can live a nice, quiet life." "A quiet life?" I repeated, my voice now laced with a bitter sarcasm. "You mean a life where I ask you for permission to buy a new cardigan? I didn't spend 60 years building a life only to be put out to pasture by my own blood." My mind raced. This was beyond greedy. This was monstrous. The boy who once held my hand in the grocery store was now a stranger, a viper coiled in my living room, ready to strike. The love I felt for him was curdling in my chest, turning into something ugly and unrecognizable. But I couldn't show them fear. Not now. I had to think. I looked at David, really looked at him. The boy who idolized his father. The man who was so quick to believe the worst of me. My Robert had been right. He had seen this coming, hadn't he? He had known that his own son would turn on me the moment money entered the equation. The realization was a devastating blow, yet also a strange source of strength. Robert's love had been a fortress, and now I had to use the walls he built to protect myself. "David, you will unlock this door, and you will leave now," I commanded, my voice firm, "or I will call the police." He laughed, a short, sharp, humorless sound. "Go ahead, Mom. You really think the cops are going to believe you? My son locked me in my own house because I wouldn't give him $48 million? They'll put you in a home for the confused. Brenda nodded, a wicked gleam in her eye. We'll tell them she's grieving, distraught. We'll say she's having a hard time, and we're just trying to help. Nobody will question a son looking out for his elderly mother. The audacity, the pure, unadulterated evil of it took my breath away. They had already thought this through. They weren't just reacting. They were executing a plan. The shock of it all gave way to a simmering rage that burned hotter than any fury I had ever known. "You're not just my son, David," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "You're a disgrace. Your father would be ashamed of you." That hit a nerve. David's face flushed a deep, angry red. "Don't you dare bring Dad into this. This is about what's rightfully ours. You've been living a lie. Dad was a successful man, and you were just a housewife. You don't deserve this. We do." The insults, the blatant or disrespect were a tidal wave. They wanted to strip me not just of my money, but my dignity, my entire life's worth. I was just a housewife, a woman who hadn't earned her place. Their words were a poison, and for a moment, I felt myself waver. What if they were right? Was I just a silly old woman, a relic from a bygone era? But then I thought of Robert's letter. He had done this for me. Not for them, for me. And his love was worth more than their greed. "That's enough," I said, a cold resolve settling over me. "I won't be disrespected in my own home. You can stand here all night, but I won't sign a thing. The money is mine." David's eyes narrowed. "Fine, if that's how you want to play it. We have all the time in the world." He and Brenda settled onto the sofa, acting as if they were guests, the very picture of calm cruelty. They were prepared to wait me out. I was an inconvenience, a stubborn obstacle in their path to unimaginable wealth. And as they sat there, two vultures in my living room, I knew that the battle was just beginning. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about a principle. It was about standing up to the people who thought they could take what was mine. I retreated to the kitchen, my heart pounding in my chest. The silver I had been polishing sat forgotten on the counter, a dull monument to a piece that had been shattered. I looked out the window at the familiar neighborhood and felt a profound sense of loneliness. I was trapped in my own home, a prisoner of my own son's greed. What was I going to do? How was I going to get out of this? The night stretched on, a surreal tableau of domestic tyranny. My son and his wife sat on my sofa, scrolling through their phones as if they were waiting for a doctor's appointment, not holding their own mother captive. I retreated to the kitchen, the scent of Robert's coffee long since replaced by the stale air of a siege. I kept expecting to wake up, to find this was all some morbid, fevered dream born of grief. But every creak of the floorboards, every quiet mutter from the living room confirmed this nightmare was real. I had to be clever. These two weren't common thugs. They were my family, and that made them more dangerous than any stranger. They knew my routines, my weaknesses. But they didn't know me now. Grief and betrayal had forged something new in me, a cold, hard resolve I hadn't known was possible. My first thought was to get to the phone, but it was in the living room, on a small table by the sofa, out of reach. They had thought of everything. The landline was an antique, a rotary model I kept for sentimental reasons. My cell phone was in my purse, which was also near the front door. Both were inaccessible. I spent an hour just pacing the kitchen, running through every ridiculous scenario in my head. I could try to bolt out the back door, but they'd hear me. I could try to sweet-talk them, to promise them a sum of money, but I knew it wouldn't be enough. The greed in their eyes was a bottomless pit.
They wanted it all. Just as the first hint of gray light began to bleed through the kitchen window, I had an idea. It was foolish, desperate, and entirely reliant on David and Brenda's predictable arrogance. My back patio had a small window, a sliding glass pane that led to my herb garden. It was the kind of window you wouldn't think twice about, the kind a homeowner always keeps unlocked. And I did. I had a habit of leaving it ajar for fresh air. It was a stupid habit, and one I silently cursed myself for now. But maybe, just maybe, it was my way out. I crept back toward the living room, my steps silent on the old hardwood floors. David was dozing, his head lolling against a cushion. Brenda, ever the watchdog, was still awake, her phone screen illuminating her face with a pale, ghostly light. She looked up, her eyes narrowing. "Where are you going, Dorothy?" she asked, her voice a low hiss. "I'm going to the bathroom. Or do I need your permission for that, too?" I snapped back, my sarcasm a thin protective shield. She gave a shrug and a smirk. "Just making sure. Don't try anything." The sheer humiliation of it all made my blood boil, but I knew better than to let her see that. I forced a look of resigned defeat on my face and walked past them, making sure my steps were a little louder now, a little more deliberate, as if to say, "See, I'm not a threat." I made a show of using the bathroom, flushing the toilet for good measure before tiptoeing back to the kitchen. The morning was breaking outside, painting the garden in a soft, ethereal light. The window was still unlocked. I could just slip out and make a run for it, but where would I go? A neighbor's house? They'd probably think I was out of my mind. The police station was too far to walk, and I was in my pajamas. The thought was laughable, but it was all I had. I slid the window open with painstaking slowness, wincing at the quiet whoosh of the glass on the track. I squeezed through the narrow opening, the cold morning air hitting me like a shock. My bare feet were numb on the dew-soaked grass. I was outside. I was free, but I was still not safe. I had to get to my car. Robert's old station wagon was parked in the driveway. The keys? Right there, on the hook, by the front door. Trapped again. I crouched behind a lilac bush, the branches scratching at my skin. I could hear them inside, talking. My heart hammered against my ribs. What were they saying? Were they planning what to do with the house, with the money? The thought made me sick. Then a new plan formed in my mind, a reckless one. I would go to Robert's other property, the one he never told me about, the one mentioned in his lawyer's brief. He had a secret estate, a massive parcel of land with a small hunting cabin in the woods. He had told me about it years ago as a little project he was working on, but I always thought it was just a hobby, some fantasy of his. A place to get away from the world, a place to be truly free. I knew the location because he'd written the address in a little notebook he kept in his study. It was a place I never thought I'd have to use, a place that was a testament to Robert's secretive nature, but also to his foresight. He had planned for everything, hadn't he? I crept around the house, my feet freezing on the cold pavement. I had to go back inside, get the keys, get my purse. It was a foolish, dangerous gamble, but I had no other choice. It was the only way I could truly get away, the only place they wouldn't think to look. I found an old garden trowel and a spare key to the shed. I could use the trowel to pry open the kitchen window from the outside. With a silent prayer to Robert, I wedged the trowel under the frame and gave a gentle push. The window slid open. I was in. I was a thief in my own home, a fugitive on the run from my own family. It was a bitter, ironic twist. I made my way to the living room, my heart in my throat. They were still on the sofa, still on their phones. I had a small window of opportunity, a moment to act. I tiptoed toward the key hook, my hand reaching, my finger shaking. Just as my hand closed around the keys, David's head snapped up. He said, "What are you doing?" My entire body went rigid. I was caught. This can't be happening. Is this all just a terrible, humiliating dream? Is my son really going to do this to me? I can't believe this is my life now, but what's to come next will not only change my life, but perhaps my son's as well. Don't go anywhere.
I'm just getting some water, I stammered, my heart thumping against my ribs like a hummingbird's wings. The lie tasted like ash. My hand was still on the keys, the cold metal of physical connection to the life I was trying to reclaim. David's eyes, a mirror of my own, narrowed with suspicion. He glanced at Brenda, a silent conversation passing between them. Brenda, with her shark-like instincts, was already on her feet. "She's lying, David. Look at her." I quickly pulled my hand away from the keys and tried to feign indifference, but I knew it was too late. My shoulders were tense, my posture was all wrong, and my face must have been a road map of my terror. David stood up slowly, the casual ease of his movements more menacing than any angry lunge. "Mom," he said, his voice deceptively soft, "we can do this the easy way or the hard way. The easy way is you sign the papers. The hard way, well, the hard way involves us making sure you don't do anything foolish." I swallowed hard. "I am not signing anything. This is my money. Robert left it to me, and you have no right to it. Neither of you do." My voice was shaky, but the conviction behind the words was a solid, unwavering wall. Brenda moved with a sudden, alarming speed. She snatched my purse from the hook, pulling out my wallet, my credit cards, my driver's license, and, I saw with a pang of dread, my health insurance card. "See, David," she said, holding up the card triumphantly. "She's on a Medicare supplement plan. A few phone calls, a few worried words about her grief-fueled confusion, and we can have a doctor's recommendation for a psychiatric evaluation. They'll put her away in a nice, quiet place where she can't cause any trouble." My stomach lurched. They were serious. This wasn't just a threat, it was a plan, a meticulously crafted, cruel, and monstrous piece of a scheme. I had thought it was about the money, but it was about power. It was about controlling me, erasing me, making me a non-person so they could take what they wanted. The indignation I felt was a fire, burning away all my fear. "You're not doing anything," I said, my voice suddenly clear and strong. "I will scream. The neighbors will hear." David chuckled. "It's 3 a.m, Mom. No one is going to hear anything but a crazy old lady. Besides, we'll tell them it's part of your episodes. We have it all figured out." I backed away, my eyes darting around the living room, searching for an escape, for a weapon, for anything. The fireplace poker was too far. The door was locked. The patio window was behind them now. I was trapped. "What do you want from me?" I whispered, the words a plea I hated making. "Just the papers, Mom," David said, his tone turning into a parody of sweet reason. "Just sign over the rights to the trust. It's for your own good. We'll give you a good life. A safe life. We'll be a family again, just like old times." "Family." I spat the word out like it was a curse. "You don't know the meaning of the word. A family protects its own. A family loves. It doesn't try to lock its matriarch up in a home for the confused." My words didn't land. They were looking at me not as a person, but as a problem to be solved. And the problem had a name: $48 million. In that moment of pure, unadulterated fear and fury, a memory of Robert came to me, clear as day. The last time we had been at his hidden estate, he'd shown me a safe, a small, unassuming thing, tucked behind a fake bookshelf in his study. "Just in case, Dot," he said with a wink, "always have a backup plan." He had given me the combination, a simple date we both knew, our first date.
He was a man who thought of everything, a man who saw the world not just for what it was, but for what it could become, both for better and for worse. A new surge of determination coursed through me. The house was a trap, but a temporary one. I had to get to that estate. I had to find a way to get out of here, and I had to do it before the sun fully rose, before they started making those worried phone calls. I turned away from them, walking with a measured pace towards the study. "I'm going to get the papers," I lied. "Just give me a minute to myself." Brenda's smile returned, wide and victorious. David simply nodded, a look of smug satisfaction on his face. They believed me. They thought they had won. They thought they had broken me. They were wrong. What happened next was something they could never have prepared for. You see, I was a woman who was supposed to just fade away, to become a quiet grandmother, but that's not who I was, and as they waited for me to return with the papers, they had no idea that my plan had nothing to do with signing anything at all. You won't believe what happened next.
The morning sun was a cold, indifferent orb in the sky, its light slanting across the living room as if to illuminate my humiliation. David and Brenda were still settled on the sofa, a picture of smug patience. They thought they had me cornered. They thought they could break my will with a few hours of their suffocating presence and a handful of vile threats. I'd spent a lifetime keeping my composure, but this was a new kind of test. I walked into Robert's study, a room that had always felt like a sanctuary. It smelled of old books, pipe tobacco, and a quiet, dignified kind of peace. Now it felt like a stage, the setting for my next desperate act. I moved to the bookshelf, my hands trembling as I ran them along the spines of Robert's collection. He had told me once that every book held a secret, a world waiting to be discovered. Little did I know, one of them held a literal one. I found the book I was looking for, an old leather-bound copy of Shakespeare's King Lear. It was the same one he had given me on our 5th anniversary. I pressed on the spine of the book, and the small hidden panel behind it clicked open, revealing a small, unassuming safe. Robert had a flair for the dramatic, even in his secret life. I input the combination, our first date, a memory that now felt a million miles away. The safe unlocked with a soft whir. Inside, there was a stack of papers, a USB drive, and a small velvet pouch. I grabbed them all, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I had no idea what was on the USB drive, but I knew whatever was in that pouch and on these documents was my last resort. I slipped everything into the pocket of my housecoat, my hands moving with a speed I didn't know I possessed. As I did, I noticed a second, smaller letter tucked into the side of the safe. It was addressed to me, in Robert's handwriting. I quickly tucked it away without reading it, knowing I didn't have a moment to spare. As I turned to leave the study, I heard a sound, a quiet rustle from behind the door. I froze. Had they followed me? My mind raced, but it was too late to panic. I took a deep breath, and with a feigned sigh, I stepped back into the living room, papers in hand. Brenda's eyes immediately lit up. "Look, David, I told you she'd come to her senses." David gave me a satisfied smile. "See, Mom, this is so much easier. Now let's get this over with." "I just need a moment to look them over," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I sat down in my favorite armchair, pretending to read the documents. I knew what they were, the trust papers, the very thing they wanted me to sign. But I also knew they weren't the real treasure. The real treasure was in my pocket. My mind was a whirlwind of calculations. They had me cornered, but I had the information, I had the truth, and I had a plan. They hadn't considered that a seemingly helpless old woman could have a hidden resource.
They had underestimated me completely. It was a mistake they would come to regret. "So what do we do now?" I asked, feigning a tired, confused voice. "Is there a notary or something we need?" David and Brenda exchanged a look. "We can handle that later, Mom. Just sign here and here. It's all straightforward." The casual cruelty of their request was staggering. They wanted me to sign away my future, my security, my husband's legacy. And they wanted me to do it as if I were signing a grocery list. I looked at David, my son, and felt a profound sense of sadness. The boy I had raised with such hope and love was gone. All that was left was a greedy stranger, a man who saw me only as an obstacle. The sadness was a kind of fuel. It burned away the last dregs of my fear, leaving only a cold, hard determination. What happened next was a moment of pure inspiration. It was a moment that would change everything, a moment they would never, ever forget. I had to choose my words carefully, to play their game better than they did. My fate and the fate of Robert's legacy depended on it. This is where the story truly begins. What I'm about to do will shock my son and his wife to their core, and you won't want to miss a single second of it. Stay with me, and I'll show you how a grandmother can turn the tables on a pair of entitled vultures. The real story is just getting started.
I set the papers on the coffee table, a prop in my desperate play. David and Brenda watched me, their eyes like hawks, waiting for me to falter. They saw a tired, confused old woman. They didn't see the woman who had managed a household, raised a son, and stood by her husband's side through decades of quiet success. They saw a mark. I saw an opportunity. "Before I sign anything," I began, my voice a little shaky, but my resolve as solid as bedrock, "there's something you need to understand. Your father, he was a brilliant man, and a very cautious one." Brenda rolled her eyes. "Get on with it, Dorothy. We don't have all day." "Oh, but we do, dear," I said, a smile I didn't feel touching my lips. "Because you see, Robert was meticulous. He never put all his eggs in one basket. He had a backup plan for everything." I paused, letting the words hang in the air, watching the faintest flicker of doubt cross David's face. I pulled out the small second letter from my pocket, the one he'd addressed to me. He wrote this for me in case of something like this. He knew what kind of people you two were. That stung. David's face hardened, but Brenda's was a mask of furious concentration. They were trying to figure out what I was doing. They were trying to call my bluff. "Don't be ridiculous, Mom. Just sign the papers." "The papers," I said, looking down at them. "These are just copies. The originals, well, they're in a very secure place, a place he only told me about." I was bluffing, of course, but their greed was blinding them. They wanted the money so badly, they'd believe anything that promised it. He told me, David, that if something were to ever happen to him, or if someone were to try to take advantage of me, that I was to go to a certain location, a safe haven, as he called it. He had a few contingency plans. I made it sound as though Robert had a dozen secret hideouts, a veritable network of financial bolt holes, when I only knew of one. I watched them, and for the first time, I saw a crack in their facade of smug confidence. They had thought this was going to be an easy takeover, a simple signature, and it would all be theirs. But now they were faced with a mystery, a woman who was not as helpless as they thought, and a dead man who was still pulling the strings. "I need to go," I said, my voice now firm and unwavering.
I need to go to that location. He said that's where I would find the instructions for everything, the real trusts, the real assets. He said I couldn't access it unless I was there, in person. It was a lie, a beautiful, brilliant lie. It was a gambit based on their own greed. I was gambling that they would want to be a part of this new treasure hunt, that they wouldn't want me to get to this secret location without them, for fear that I would disappear and the money with me. David looked at Brenda, his eyes wide with a mix of suspicion and insatiable avarice. The thought of even more money, more hidden properties, more secret assets was too much for them to resist. Brenda's calculating gaze landed on me, and for a moment I saw a flicker of genuine respect. Not for me as a person, but for my potential as a vessel to their wealth. "Where is it, Mom?" David asked, his voice suddenly breathless. "Where do we go?" "I'll only tell you when we're in the car," I said, standing up. "Now, you can either drive me there, or you can watch as I call the police and tell them what you've done. I'm sure they'd be very interested in this entire charade." I walked toward the front door, a woman on a mission. David, after a moment of stunned silence, followed. Brenda, her face a storm of conflicting emotions, fury, greed, and a nascent excitement, was right behind him. They had me, but they also needed me. And in that moment, that was all the freedom I needed. My son and his wife had no idea what was waiting for them at the end of this journey. They thought they were the predators, but they were about to walk right into a trap that I had not set, but would happily spring. The tables are about to turn in the most spectacular way imaginable, and you won't want to miss a second of it. Stay with me, and I will tell you exactly how this is going to unfold.
The ride was a tense, silent affair. David drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his jaw clenched. Brenda was in the passenger seat, her eyes flicking between me in the back and her husband, a silent conductor of their shared avaricious greed. I, meanwhile, was a study in feigned calm. I stared out the window, watching the familiar suburban sprawl give way to winding country roads, and then to the endless dark green tapestry of the forest. The air in the car was thick with unspoken questions, with their gnawing suspicion and my quiet triumph. They had taken the bait. They had no idea where they were going or what they were about to encounter. All they knew was that the promise of more was too intoxicating to resist. We drove for what felt like an eternity, the silence only broken by the low hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of Brenda shifting in her seat. I took the time to let my mind wander, to remember Robert and the beautiful, complex man he was. He was a master of secrets, a man who built a quiet empire, while everyone, including me, thought he was just a simple, good-hearted husband. He was a man who saw the world for what it was, full of people who would take everything if you let them. He had seen the truth about his own son long before I had. It was a painful, gut-wrenching realization, but it was also a shield. It was his last act of love, and it was a powerful one. He hadn't just left me money. He had left me a plan. He had left me a way to fight back. I had no doubt that they would have done exactly what they said they would, confined me to a home, labeled me as confused, and taken everything I had. But their arrogance was their undoing. They thought they were smarter than me, smarter than Robert. They were wrong. After an hour, the car slowed, and David pulled off the main road onto a narrow, unpaved lane. The trees closed in around us, their branches forming a dark canopy that blocked out the sky. "Where are we, Mom?" David finally asked, his voice tight. "Just keep going, David. It's a little bit further," I replied, my voice calm.
I could feel Brenda's eyes on me in the rearview mirror, her suspicion turning to a barely contained fury. She hated not being in control. She hated mysteries, and I was now a mystery she couldn't solve. Finally, the trees parted, and we pulled up to a set of large, ornate iron gates. They were old, rusted, and covered in ivy, but they were still a powerful statement. Beyond them, a long, winding gravel driveway stretched into the distance, disappearing behind a small hill. The air here was different. It was cool and smelled of pine needles and damp earth. This was Robert's secret estate, the place where he could be truly alone. And now, it was my sanctuary. David got out of the car, his face a mixture of awe and confusion. "What is this place, Mom? You never said Dad had an estate out here." "I told you he had a number of investments you didn't know about," I said, a little smile touching my lips. "Now open the gates. The combination is written on the little note taped to the post there." Brenda scoffed. "And you expect us to believe that?" "You don't have to believe anything, Brenda," I said, my voice as smooth as silk. "But if you want to find out what's on the other side of these gates, I suggest you get out and open them. Or we can all just sit here until we run out of gas." They looked at each other, and I could see their internal debate play out on their faces. The thought of walking away from this, from a potential jackpot, was simply too much for them to bear. David walked over to the post, found the small laminated note with the combination, and punched it into the keypad. The gates whirred open with a groan of metal. He got back in the car, and we drove on. The driveway was longer than it looked, twisting and turning through a meticulously maintained forest. We passed a small, sparkling lake, and I caught a glimpse of a small boathouse nestled on its shores. This wasn't just a hunting cabin. This was a property, a beautiful, sprawling, secret world that Robert had built for himself and for me. We drove for another 5 minutes before we finally saw it. Nestled on the crest of a small hill was a beautiful 2-story log cabin. It was rustic, but grand. It had a wraparound porch, a huge stone fireplace on the outside, and a sprawling, manicured lawn, the kind of place you see in a magazine, the kind of place you dream of owning. The look on David's face was one of pure, unadulterated shock. He stopped the car, his mouth agape. Brenda gasped, "My God, this is incredible." "Yes, it is," I said, my voice full of a quiet, hard-won satisfaction. "And this, my dears, is just the beginning." I had to play the part now. I had to convince them that this was only a taste of what was to come. I had to make them believe that I was their only key to unlocking this new, even bigger fortune. I stepped out of the car, breathing in the fresh, clean air. I felt the tension of the last 24 hours begin to melt away, replaced by a surge of power. This was my sanctuary. This was my home now. And as I walked toward the front door, I saw my son and his wife staring at the place, completely captivated by the thought of what else Robert could have hidden here. They were so close to the finish line, so close to the riches they so desperately craved. But they had no idea that the real prize was not the money, but the truth that was about to be revealed, and they had no idea what was waiting for them inside. We stepped inside the cabin and they froze. The rustic facade gave way to an interior of breathtaking, understated luxury. A towering 2-story stone fireplace dominated the main living area, its hearth large enough to roast a small ox. Soaring ceilings with exposed wooden beams, a state-of-the-art kitchen with a massive butcher block island, and floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the forest and the lake. This was not a cabin. It was a masterpiece. Branda's jaw was practically on the floor. "Dorothy, this is a mansion. You said it was a cabin." I simply smiled, a cool, satisfied expression on my face.
It's a retreat, my dear. Robert's escape. He liked his privacy. I walked past them and into the living room, my gaze taking in every detail. This was a testament to his love, a place built not for show, but for peace. It was a place for me. David was still standing by the door, his mind clearly racing, trying to put the pieces together. How did he do all this without us knowing? He stammered. As I said, I replied, moving toward the fireplace. Robert was a very private man, and a very smart one. I patted the stone mantel, a sudden wave of emotion washing over me. This was the place where he had planned his quiet, dignified legacy. This was the place where he had built me a fortress. Now, where are the papers? Brenda demanded, snapping out of her daze. Her eyes darted around the room as if expecting to find a pile of gold bars in the corner. Patience, Brenda, I said, my voice dripping with a newfound authority. I need to make a phone call first. I reached into my pocket, my fingers brushing against the cold, hard surface of the USB drive. I knew my call wouldn't be to the police. It would be to the one person I could truly trust, Robert's lawyer, Alistair Finch. I needed him to know I was safe. David's face twisted in rage. No, Mom, no calls. You said you'd give us the papers. He lunged for me, but I was ready. I sidestepped him with a surprising agility, the years of Pilates finally paying off. He stumbled, catching himself on the edge of a rustic wooden table. You don't dare touch me, I said. The quiet menace in my voice stopped him cold. You've come this far. Are you going to throw it all away for a simple phone call? He hesitated, his eyes flicking to Brenda, who gave her a sharp, almost imperceptible shake of her head. No, they wouldn't risk it, not with a potential fortune hanging in the balance. I took out my phone and dialed Alistair's number. I put the phone on speaker, a deliberate act of transparency. I wanted them to hear everything. Alistair, it's Dorothy. I'm at Robert's estate, the one he built. I'm with David and Brenda. Alistair's voice came through, his usual professional tone replaced by a note of concern. Dorothy, are you all right? They haven't hurt you, have they? I'm fine, Alistair. They're with me. They seem to be very interested in what Robert left me. More interested than in my well-being, I'm afraid. I said the words with a bitter, sarcastic edge, watching the fury rise in my son's eyes. Dorothy, please be careful, Alistair warned. I'll be there in a few hours. I'm contacting the authorities now just in case. Brenda stepped forward. There's no need for that, Mr. Finch. We're just here to help Dorothy settle into her new home. We're family. Her voice was sickeningly sweet, a saccharine lie. Family? I scoffed. A family doesn't lock its own mother in her home. A family doesn't threaten to have her committed. You call this family, Brenda? I call this a hostage situation. David's face was a mask of furious betrayal. Mom, why are you doing this? We just want what's rightfully ours. Rightfully yours, I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. You gave up any right you had to me when you demanded I hand over what was mine, when you treated me like a broken vase to be discarded. This isn't about you, David. It's about your father's legacy and his love for me. I ended the call and looked at them. The anger in their eyes had been replaced with a chilling realization. I wasn't a fragile, helpless old woman. I was a force to be reckoned with. And I was about to use every bit of my newfound power to make sure they got exactly what they deserved. You think you know how this ends? You're wrong. The truth about Robert's legacy is more complex than a simple transfer of wealth. And what I'm about to reveal will change everything. Stay with me, and I'll show you exactly how this is all going to end. The arrival of Alistair Finch was a dramatic pivot. He pulled up the long driveway in a sleek black sedan, the polished metal glinting in the morning light. Behind him, two local police cruisers followed, their lights off but their presence of powerful statement. David and Brenda watched from the porch, their faces a mixture of fear and rage. They hadn't counted on this. They had thought their little scheme was a private family matter, but I had made it a public spectacle. Alistair stepped out of his car, a picture of professional calm. He was a tall man, impeccably dressed, and he carried a briefcase like a shield. The two police officers, a stern-faced man and a younger, more empathetic-looking woman, stood a respectful distance behind him. "Mrs. May," Alistair said, his voice carrying clearly across the lawn, "are you all right?" "I am perfectly fine, Alistair," I replied, a cold sense of triumph filling me. "But I'm afraid my son and his wife have some questions for you about my husband's will." David stepped forward, his face contorted in a desperate attempt to regain control. "Mr. Finch, this is a misunderstanding. We were just helping my mother move in. She's a bit confused." "Confused?" I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "The only thing I'm confused about is how I could have raised a son with so little integrity." I turned to the police officers. "Officers, I'd like to file a report. My son and his wife locked me in my home and threatened me if I didn't sign over my inheritance." Brenda's gasp was audible. "Dorothy, you can't!" she shrieked. "This is our family. You're ruining everything." "You ruined it, Brenda," I said, the words cutting through her panic. "The moment you and David decided that a pile of money was worth more than our family." The older police officer stepped forward. "Sir, ma'am, we need to hear both sides of the story, but first, we need to see some identification." Alistair opened his briefcase and took out a stack of documents. "Officers, these are the legal documents confirming that Mrs. May is the sole heir to Mr. May's estate. The will is clear and has been filed with the state. Any claims to the contrary are unfounded." He then turned to David and Brenda. "As for you two, your actions constitute extortion and unlawful confinement. I would advise you both to step away and allow the police to handle this." Brenda's face crumpled. She looked at David, a silent plea in her eyes. But David was a man possessed. The thought of losing the $48 million was too much for him. "I have something you don't," he shouted, pointing a trembling finger at me. "The key to the real estate, the trust documents. You don't know where they are." I simply smiled and reached into my pocket, pulling out the small black USB drive. "You mean this, David? The one your father left for me in a hidden safe? You'll find that everything you're looking for is right here, and it's all in my name." The look on his face was one of pure, devastating defeat. The color drained from his cheeks as he realized he had been outsmarted, not just by me, but by his own dead father. "As for your claim on this estate," Alistair said, a subtle air of satisfaction in his voice, "Mr. May made a final amendment to his will. He left a specific instruction that this estate and the surrounding land was to be placed in a separate trust for his son and daughter-in-law. It was a test, a way to see if you would honor his wishes and respect your mother. But he also stipulated that if either of you made any attempt to coerce, threaten, or harm Mrs. May in any way, all assets would be transferred to a charitable trust." The truth was out. Robert hadn't just left me a fortune, he had set a trap. He had given David and Brenda a chance, a way to have their own legacy. But they had failed. Miserably. David looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something other than greed in his eyes. I saw shame. He had lost everything, not because of me, but because of his own actions. He had squandered his chance, his last chance for a meaningful relationship with his father, and now for a significant inheritance. I walked over to the police officer and handed him the USB drive.
I believe this contains all the information you need, officer. The officer nodded and turned to David and Brenda. We're going to need you to come with us for questioning. You have the right to remain silent. As the officers led them away, David turned to look at me, his eyes full of a terrible, silent regret. But it was too late. He had made his choice. I walked back up to the porch, a quiet triumph in my heart. Robert had saved me not just with money, but with a powerful final lesson. He had shown me that true family isn't about blood, it's about loyalty and love. And he had shown me that I was stronger than I ever thought possible. I was no longer a victim. I was the keeper of his legacy, and I was finally free.
The silence was a thick, heavy blanket after the police cars and Alistair's sedan disappeared down the driveway. I stood on the porch, a lone figure on the grand stage Robert had built. The house, once a testament to my husband's love and foresight, now felt like the end of an era. The drama, the betrayal, the threats, it all faded into the background, replaced by a quiet, profound exhaustion. I went back inside and sat down in front of the huge fireplace, the weight of the last 24 hours finally settling in my bones. I was free, and I was safe, but the victory was a bittersweet one. I had lost my son. The boy I had raised was gone, replaced by a man so consumed by greed that he would betray his own mother. The realization was a devastating blow, a final, painful act of grief that was far worse than losing Robert. I thought of the little boy who used to bring me bouquets of wildflowers he picked from the side of the road, and the teenager who shyly handed me a Mother's Day card with a drawing of me as a superhero. How did that boy become this man? I knew the answer, of course. He hadn't been an accident. He was a product of a culture of entitlement, of a belief that he deserved everything without earning a thing. And I, in my own way, had contributed to that. I had always shielded him, always helped him, always made things easy. I had given him everything but a strong sense of character. And now, I was paying the price. I was not just a victim. I was a witness to the moral decay of my own flesh and blood. The triumph of having outsmarted them was a small consolation, but it was there. I had stood up for myself. I had honored Robert's trust. I had refused to be a victim, and in that, I found a kind of peace. I pulled the second letter from my pocket, the one Robert had left in the safe. My hands trembled as I opened it. It was shorter than the first, and it was addressed to both me and David. My dearest Dorothy and David, if you are reading this, David, you have made it to the cabin. I hope you and your mother are together and that you have come to understand that this is not just about money. It is about family. I left this property for you, David. It was to be your legacy, a place for you and your family to create a new life, but it was only to be yours if you honored your mother and her wishes, if you respected her as the matriarch of our family and not as a means to an end. If you have done so, then this is yours. If not, then the deeds and the trust have been set up to be transferred to a charitable foundation upon my lawyer's confirmation of your actions. I hope for your sake that you have made the right choice. I love you both. Robert. Tears streamed down my face. Robert, even from beyond the grave, had given my son a chance. He had given him an opportunity to prove his worth, to show that he was a man of integrity. And David had failed. He had not only lost the inheritance, but he had lost his final act of love and trust.
The letter was a powerful, final lesson. It wasn't about the money. It was about loyalty. It was about family. It was about love. And in that, I found a kind of closure. Robert had seen it all, and he had protected me in a way I never could have protected myself. I walked to the window and looked out at the sprawling, beautiful property, the trees, the lake, the quiet peace of the place. It was a new beginning, a new life, and I was going to live it fully, not just for myself, but for Robert and for the woman he knew I could be. I was not a confused old woman. I was a matriarch. And this was my sanctuary. This was my legacy. The road ahead was a long one, filled with lawyers, paperwork, and the pain of mending a broken family. But for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of hope. I was no longer a victim. I was the keeper of Robert's trust, and I was going to honor it. I was going to build a new life, a life of peace and purpose, a life that proved that love, in the end, always triumphs over greed.